I was lying in the ER when my parents refused to take my 6-year-old son. They called him too much, said they were busy, and walked out. 2 days later, I saw them smiling on a luxury boat with my sister's kids. What happened next didn't just end our relationship, it rewrote who got protected. The afternoon everything changed didn't feel important while it was happening. It felt ordinary in the quiet, forgettable way most afternoons do. I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, rereading a school email I'd already read twice. Something about picture day forms, something that didn't matter. The sunlight came in at an angle that made dust visible in the air, floating slowly like it had nowhere else to be. Ethan was at the table, legs swinging under his chair. His feet didn't reach the floor, so they never stopped moving. Back and forth, back and forth. He had a half-eaten granola bar in one hand and a pencil in the other, tapping the eraser against his workbook without realizing it. "Is this math or reading?" he asked, squinting at the page like it might confess if he stared hard enough. "Math," I said. He sighed, dramatic and soft. "Of course it is." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because this was us. Small complaints, small negotiations, the kind of moments you don't think to hold on to because you assume there will be more. I leaned against the counter and took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm. My stomach twisted, sharp enough that I paused. It wasn't the first time that week. I told myself it was stress, or hunger, or nothing worth stopping a day over. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," I said immediately, too quickly. "Just tired." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to tapping his pencil. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere a dog barked. The world continued in its usual way, completely uninterested in how fragile it actually was. I remember thinking about my parents then, not because of anything specific, just the vague comfort of knowing they were nearby, that if something went wrong, there were people who were supposed to step in. They liked that reputation, reliable, involved, the kind of grandparents who showed up to school events if there were enough people around to notice. Ethan finished his page and slid it toward me. "Done." I looked it over, gave him a check mark, and ruffled his hair. He leaned into the touch for half a second longer than necessary, then pulled away like he hadn't. I wish I'd noticed that. The pain came back harder when I stood up straight. It bloomed fast, stealing my breath. I put a hand on the counter and waited for it to pass. "Mom?" Ethan's voice changed, lower, careful. "I'm fine," I said again, though this time I wasn't sure. I didn't want to scare him. I didn't want to make it a thing. But my vision blurred at the edges, and the room tilted just enough that I had to sit down. That's when I knew we weren't finishing homework. I don't remember much about the drive except Ethan's voice asking questions I couldn't fully answer. "Are we going somewhere?" "Just to get checked." "Like a doctor?" "Yes." "Will it take long?" "Soon," I said. The word came out automatically, like it always did. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and something metallic, the kind of smell that makes your shoulders tense before your brain catches up. A nurse guided us through double doors, her voice calm, practiced. Ethan stayed close, his fingers hooking into the hem of my shirt. Not pulling, just holding on. They put me on a bed behind a curtain. Machines beeped. People spoke in low, efficient tones. Ethan was given a plastic chair and told to sit right there. He did exactly what he was told. His legs dangled. He swung them slowly, watching everything with wide eyes. He didn't touch anything, didn't ask for his tablet, didn't complain. He was trying to be easy. A nurse crouched down in front of him. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" "Ethan," he said. She smiled. "I'm going to ask your mom a few questions, okay?" He nodded and looked at me, checking. "I'm right here," I said. The nurse stood and lowered her voice. "Is there anyone who can come get your son? He can't stay in the treatment area." The question landed heavier than it should have. "My parents," I said without hesitation. "They live close." I believed it when I said it. Believed it the way you believe gravity will keep working. She nodded and stepped away to make a call. Another staff member appeared with a clipboard. Words like protocol and supervision floated past me without fully settling. Ethan leaned in. "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming?" "Yes," I said. "They're on their way." His shoulders relaxed, just a little, enough that I noticed. He climbed onto the chair properly and folded his hands in his lap, like he was in trouble and trying not to be. His feet still didn't reach the floor. "How long?" he asked. "Not long," I said. He nodded, waited. Minutes passed in a way that felt stretched thin. Every time someone walked by the curtain, Ethan looked up. Every time footsteps faded, his legs swung a little faster. "How long now?" he asked again. I checked the clock, didn't tell him the number. "Soon." When my parents finally arrived, I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy, like the ground had stopped shifting under my feet. This was the part where things were supposed to get easier. I didn't know yet that this was the last moment of that version of the story. I didn't know that I was about to watch something break that couldn't be put back together. I just knew that the curtain was moving, and my parents were stepping inside. And for a brief, foolish second, I thought we were safe. My mother came in first. She wore the same concerned expression she always did in public places, the one she'd perfected over years of being seen as a good parent. Her eyebrows lifted just enough. Her mouth set into a soft line, like she was bracing herself for bad news. My father followed close behind, pausing for half a second inside the curtain. His eyes flicked around the room before settling on me, then Ethan. I noticed it even then, the way he checked who was watching. "There you are," my mother said gently, already moving toward Ethan. He slid off the chair so fast his feet barely touched the ground. "Grandma!" She bent down and wrapped her arms around him, tight and full, the kind of hug meant to be seen. She rocked him slightly, one hand rubbing his back. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. Ethan relaxed into her. I felt something unclench in my chest. For a moment, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Then my mother pulled back just enough to look down at him, still smiling. "God," she said lightly. "He really is exhausting, isn't he? Always so clingy." The words didn't sound sharp. That was the worst part. They sounded casual, familiar. Ethan went still, not stiff, just quiet. His shoulders dropped, his face smoothed over like someone had erased something from it. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. I said, "Please don't say that in front of him." My voice came out calm, but I felt it shaking inside my chest. My mother waved a hand like I'd commented on the weather. "Oh, Claire, you know I don't mean anything by it." My father shifted his weight and checked his watch. "So what's going on?" he asked, already sounding impatient. "They're still running tests," I said. "I need you to take Ethan tonight, just tonight. I don't know if they're keeping me." For a heartbeat, I truly believed she would say yes, because this was normal, because this was what families did. My mother's expression changed. It wasn't worry, it was calculation. She straightened and gave a small, tight laugh. "We can't do that." I stared at her. "What do you mean you can't?" My father answered this time. "We're busy." No apology, no explanation, just a statement, like I'd asked him to pick up milk on the way home. "I'm in the emergency room," I said. My mother sighed and glanced toward the nurse's station, lowering her voice just slightly. "You're awake, you're talking, you're fine." Ethan's fingers found my sleeve again, hooked in, gentle and desperate. "We can't rearrange everything," she continued, "and you know how he is. He's a lot." I felt something shift inside me then, not anger, not yet, something colder. "Please," I said, "he needs someone he knows." My mother leaned in and kissed my forehead quickly. It felt like being stamped, not comforted. "Be good," she said brightly. "Okay?" Then she turned. My father followed her without another word. For half a second, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I waited for them to stop, to turn back, for someone to say something. No one did. The curtain swayed as they left, then fell back into place. Ethan made a small sound, not a cry, something tighter, like he was swallowing it. A nurse stepped in almost immediately, her voice firm but gentle. "We need to move your son out of the treatment area." I reached for him. "I'm right here," I said, even as my hand shook. "We'll keep him safe," she said, "but he can't stay back here." Ethan looked at me, eyes wide and wet. "Mom?" "I'm here," I said again. "You didn't do anything wrong." The nurse crouched down. "Hey, buddy, we're going to go sit in a family room for a bit, okay? You can have some water." He clung harder to my sleeve. Then, slowly, carefully, the nurse peeled his fingers away. I watched my son get led down the hallway because my parents refused to take him. The betrayal wasn't that they left, it was that he looked back at me as he was taken away, and I couldn't go with him. Time blurred after that. Voices came and went. People spoke calmly, which somehow made everything worse. Every time someone came near, I asked the same question. "Where is my son?" "He's safe," they said. "Is he with my parents?" There was always a pause, just long enough. That pause taught me a new kind of fear. When I finally got my phone back later that night, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. No messages from my mother, no check-in, no explanation, just silence. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying one sentence over and over. "He's exhausting." The words echoed differently now. Not as a joke, as a decision. The hospital doesn't sleep, it just lowers its voice. Lights stay on, footsteps soften, machines continue their steady rhythms like nothing extraordinary has happened. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed quietly. Somewhere else, someone cried without trying to hide it. I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks I could see from my angle. I didn't want to close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw Ethan's face when my mother spoke. Not shocked, not angry, just erased. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She spoke kindly, asked me to rate my pain, adjusted something at my IV. I answered automatically. Before she left, I asked, "Can I see my son?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "He's resting in the family room," she said carefully. "Staff is with him." "Can I go to him?" "Not yet," she said. "We need you to stay put for now." I nodded like I understood, like my chest wasn't tightening with every second. Hours passed, or minutes. I couldn't tell. Time stopped behaving the way it normally did. When they finally let me sit up, it was already past midnight. My phone buzzed in my hand like it had been waiting. No messages from my parents. I checked again, refreshed the screen. Nothing. I didn't know what I expected. An apology. An explanation. "We'll come back." Something. Instead, I opened social media without really thinking about it. Just muscle memory. Something to distract myself. The first post that loaded was my sister Lauren's. Bright blue water, sunlight, smiling faces. I stared at the screen until my eyes started to sting. There were multiple photos. Her kids leaning against a railing, drinks on a table, a boat slicing through calm water like it belonged there. And in the background of the third photo, my parents. My mother's hair was blowing in the wind. My father had his arm around one of Lauren's kids. They were smiling in that relaxed, satisfied way people smile when they have nowhere else to be. They weren't busy, they weren't overwhelmed, they weren't dealing with anything urgent. They were on a harbor cruise. I set the phone down carefully like it might shatter if I didn't. The nurse came back in shortly after, followed by a woman I hadn't seen before. She wore regular clothes, not scrubs, and carried a folder tucked under her arm. "Hi, Claire," she said. "I'm Ms. Reynolds. I'm a social worker." I swallowed. "Where's my son?" "He's safe," she said. "That's the first thing I want you to know." "Is he alone?" "No, staff is with him." "And my parents?" She didn't answer right away. "They were here earlier," she said. "They declined to take him." Hearing it said out loud felt different, heavier, more official. "We've documented the situation," she continued gently. "This is a temporary supervision arrangement. We're not taking custody. We're making sure he's safe." I nodded, even though my hands were clenched into fists under the blanket. "Is there anyone else listed as an emergency contact?" she asked. I frowned. "I don't think so." She flipped a page in her folder. "Actually, there is." My heart skipped. "Who?" Before she could answer, there was a soft knock and the curtain shifted. A man stepped inside. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Then I did. "Daniel," I said. My uncle stood there awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to take up space. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but his eyes were steady. "Hey, Claire," he said. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't comment on the IV or the monitors or the hospital bed. He looked straight at Ms. Reynolds and asked, "Where's the child?" The question cut through the room. Ms. Reynolds nodded. "He's in the family room. Staff supervised." Daniel exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for a long time. "He shouldn't be there," he said. "He shouldn't be alone." "He isn't alone," she replied. "But you're listed as an emergency contact. That's why we called you." I blinked. "I don't remember putting you down." "You did," he said gently. "Years ago, on a school form. You probably didn't think about it." I stared at him, a strange pressure building behind my eyes. Maybe I had thought about it. Maybe, somewhere deep down, I'd known exactly who would show up. "I'm here," Daniel said. "I can take him." Ms. Reynolds nodded. "That would be appropriate." Something loosened in my chest then. Not relief. Something closer to permission. Before anything else could be said, footsteps approached again. Familiar ones. My parents walked back into the room like they'd never left. My mother's face was arranged into concern. My father's brows were pulled together in seriousness. It was a good performance, until my mother saw Daniel. Her expression froze. My father stopped short, his eyes flicking from Daniel to Ms. Reynolds, then back to me, counting. "Irene," my mother started, then corrected herself. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Daniel didn't raise his voice. "Taking care of the child you left." The room went very quiet. Ms. Reynolds cleared her throat. "We need to document what happened earlier regarding Ethan." My mother smiled too quickly. "Of course. There was a misunderstanding." Daniel shook his head once. "You walked out," he said, "and you didn't take him." My father's jaw tightened. "This doesn't need to be public." "You made it public," Daniel replied, calm and even, "when you abandoned a child in a hospital." The words hung there. Ms. Reynolds looked down at her folder. "We'll proceed with a temporary care transfer," she said. My mother's smile faltered. "We'll take him now," she said suddenly, turning to me. "We were just overwhelmed earlier." I thought of the photo on the boat, of the sunlight, of the smiles. I didn't answer. Daniel stood. "I'm taking him," he said. "Tonight, and as long as it takes." When Ethan was brought back into the room, he didn't run to anyone. He looked at me first, then at my mother, then back at me. Daniel crouched down. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I'm going to stay with you tonight." Ethan hesitated. Then he leaned into Daniel like he'd been holding himself upright for hours and was finally allowed to stop. My parents left again. This time, the room didn't feel emptier. It felt cleaner. After Ethan left with Daniel, the room went quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow, like someone had turned the volume down on my life and left me alone with the echo. I lay there listening to sounds I'd been ignoring all night. The hum of the machines, the squeak of a cart rolling past, a distant cough that didn't belong to anyone I could see. Everything felt too sharp now that there was no small voice asking questions. I closed my eyes and immediately saw Ethan's face again. Not crying, not angry, just trying to understand something no child should have to understand. I didn't sleep much. When morning came, it arrived without ceremony. Pale light through the narrow window. A nurse adjusting my IV. Someone asking if I was hungry. The first thing I said was, Where's my son?" "He's with your uncle," the nurse said. "He stayed overnight." Relief hit me so suddenly it made my chest ache. Later that morning, Daniel came back. He looked exhausted. Not fragile tired, determined tired. The kind of tired you get from staying alert all night because a child keeps waking up and pretending they're fine. He sat down beside my bed and exhaled slowly. "He fell asleep holding my hand," he said. "Didn't want to let go." I swallowed hard. "Was he okay?" "He was scared," Daniel said honestly, "but he's safe." That word landed differently now. Safe. Daniel hesitated, then said, "There's something you should know." I braced myself. "They've been talking about you," he said, "for years." My stomach dropped. "My parents?" "Yes." He chose his words carefully. Not loudly, not in a way you could point to and prove, just stories. "What kind of stories?" Daniel met my eyes. "That you don't help them, that you're selfish, that you're too busy, that you make everything difficult." I stared at him, trying to process the sentence. It didn't fit with the version of reality I'd been living in. "I help them," I said. The words came out flat. "I send them money, every month." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What?" "I've been sending them money for years," I repeated. "For Mom's back, treatments, things insurance wouldn't cover." He went very still. "How much?" he asked quietly. "I don't know the total," I said. "I never added it up, but it's a lot." Daniel didn't say anything. He just waited. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, not because he asked for proof, because I needed someone to see it, to confirm I hadn't imagined my own life. I opened my banking app and scrolled, month after month after month. The same transfer, same amount. Daniel leaned forward without realizing he was moving. His hand went to his mouth. "Oh," he whispered. "That's 6 years," I said, "and there were extra payments, when things were urgent." He looked up at me, his eyes dark with something that wasn't pity. It was recognition. "They told me," he said slowly, "that you never supported them, that you refused to help." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Apparently, I'm selfish and also an ATM. Daniel stared back at the screen, then shook his head once. "They lied to me," he said. Then, even quieter, "And if they lied to me, they've been lying to you." Something inside me finally snapped into place. Not anger, clarity. By the time I was discharged later that day, Daniel was already making calls. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. Gathering statements, saving messages, creating a timeline. Ethan sat at the kitchen table at Daniel's place, coloring quietly. He didn't ask about his grandparents. He didn't ask why things felt different. He didn't need to. A week later, Daniel invited the family over for my grandfather's birthday. Everyone came. My parents arrived smiling, confident, playing their usual roles. My mother moved through the room like nothing had happened. My father lingered near the edges, scanning, always scanning. Ethan stayed close to me. At some point, my mother laughed and said to someone nearby, loud enough for others to hear, "You know Claire, always dramatic." A few people chuckled, reflexively. Daniel stood up. "I need everyone to listen for a moment," he said. The room went quiet slowly, like people realized too late that something was about to change. My mother blinked. "Daniel, what is this?" He opened a folder and didn't look at her. "You've been telling people for years that Claire doesn't help you." My mother's smile twitched. "She sends you money every month," Daniel continued calmly. $1,320 for 6 years. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." Daniel didn't look at them. "That's over $90,000. The color drained from my mother's face. "There were also 41 additional payments," he went on, "urgent ones." My father stared at the floor. "And when a child needed you," Daniel said, his voice steady, "you left him in a hospital." Silence pressed in from all sides. My mother opened her mouth, closed it, tried to smile. "We were overwhelmed," she said weakly. Daniel met her eyes. "You were on a boat." No one spoke. The story had changed, and this time, it wasn't going back. After that night, everything slowed down, not in a peaceful way, in the way things do when the noise stops but the damage is still ringing in your ears. People didn't rush to comfort me. They didn't need to. The truth had landed, and everyone in the room was busy rearranging their understanding of the past. Conversations became quieter. Side glances replaced jokes. The familiar hum of family chatter never quite came back. My parents left early. They didn't say goodbye to Ethan. He didn't notice. On the drive back to Daniel's house, Ethan watched the streetlights pass like blinking stars. He didn't talk much. He held his backpack in his lap with both hands, like it was something precious. That night, he asked a question he'd never asked before. "Am I too much?" The words were soft, careful, like he was testing them. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "No," I said immediately. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. Daniel spoke from the passenger seat. "You're exactly right," he said, "and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." Ethan glanced up at him, surprised, then leaned back against the seat. At Daniel's house, things were quieter than I was used to. No background TV noise, no forced conversation, just space. Ethan slept through the night for the first time in days. I didn't. The next week passed in short bursts. Phone calls, emails, bank statements printed and spread across Daniel's dining table. Screenshots saved into folders. Dates highlighted. No yelling, no dramatics. Just patterns. The money transfers were consistent, predictable, almost boring. That was the trick of it. Nothing looked alarming on its own. It only made sense when lined up side by side. Daniel hired a forensic accountant to help trace timelines, not to dig into anyone's accounts illegally, just to map what could be mapped from my records and public information. Vacations, purchases, payments. They overlapped more often than coincidence could explain. When Daniel showed me the first summary, I didn't cry. I felt embarrassed, not because I'd helped, but because I'd never questioned why the help never seemed to end. We moved carefully after that, not out of fear, but precision. Daniel explained mediation to me in a way that made sense, civil, factual. No accusations, no moral speeches. I agreed. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed confirmation. The mediation took months. Slow emails, scheduled calls, long silences between responses. My parents tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication, a stressful period. But numbers don't misunderstand. The settlement wasn't everything I'd sent. It was never going to be. That wasn't the point. When the first payment came through, I stared at the deposit notification longer than I expected. It wasn't joy, it was relief, proof that my reality wasn't exaggerated, that I hadn't imagined years of quiet sacrifice. Ethan didn't know the details. He didn't need to. What he knew was that his routine had changed. Sunday dinners at Daniel's, quiet mornings, adults who listened when he spoke, even when it took him a while to say what he meant. One afternoon, months later, he came home from school and dropped his backpack by the door. "Guess what?" he said. "What?" "I told my teacher about Uncle Daniel." "Oh, yeah?" He said I'm lucky. Ethan shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone on the couch and let myself think about my parents for the first time in a while. Not with anger, with distance. I realized something then that felt almost gentle. I wasn't grieving the people they were. I was grieving the people I thought they could be. And that grief didn't need their participation to heal. Life didn't become perfect. It became quieter, more honest. I stopped explaining myself, stopped translating my feelings into versions that made other people comfortable. Ethan started laughing louder again, asking questions without checking if they were allowed. One evening, as I tucked him in, he wrapped his arms around my neck. "You're not too much either," he said seriously. I smiled into his hair. "Thank you." As I turned off the light, I understood something I'd been circling for a long time. Protection isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to go back. Time has a strange way of smoothing the edges of things once the danger has passed. Not erasing them, just making them easier to hold. By the time winter arrived, the worst of the chaos had settled into a quiet routine. Ethan went to school from Daniel's house a few days a week and from mine the rest. We kept it flexible. We didn't call it anything official. We just did what worked. My parents tried to reach out at first, not directly, never with apologies. My mother sent messages that sounded almost reasonable if you didn't know the context. We should talk. Families go through things. This has all been very hurtful. Hurtful. As if the feeling had simply appeared on its own, with no cause. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Daniel handled everything else. The lawyers, the scheduling, the neutral language that stripped emotion out of every exchange and left only facts behind. It was strange how quickly my parents stopped pushing once the conversation stopped being emotional. Once there was nothing to argue with, no tears to deflect, no guilt to lean on. They weren't interested in accountability. They were interested in access. Without that, they faded. Lauren didn't fade. She called one afternoon while Ethan was at school. I watched her name light up my phone and let it ring longer than necessary before answering. "What are you doing?" she asked without greeting. "I'm at work," I said. "You humiliated Mom and Dad." I leaned back in my chair. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. You didn't have to say it in front of everyone. "They said it to everyone for years," I replied. "I just corrected the record." She scoffed. "You always do this. You make everything so dramatic." I thought about the hospital, the hallway, Ethan's hand slipping from mine. "I didn't leave my child in a hospital," I said quietly. There was a pause. "That's not fair," Lauren said finally. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." She hung up without saying goodbye. After that, the silence spread more evenly. No sides taken, no grand declarations. Just a gradual understanding that things had changed, and pretending otherwise wasn't going to fix it. Ethan adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are good at that when adults stop asking them to be smaller. One Saturday morning, he sat at the kitchen counter while I made pancakes. He was telling me about a science project, hands moving excitedly, words tumbling over each other. Halfway through, he stopped. "I talk a lot," he said cautiously. "You do," I agreed. He waited. "And that's okay," I added. His shoulders relaxed. He kept talking. Daniel watched from the doorway, coffee in hand, saying nothing. He didn't need to. His presence had become its own reassurance. That afternoon, I signed the last mediation document. It was anticlimactic. No courtroom, no dramatic ending, just a digital signature and a confirmation email. When I closed my laptop, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of the money, because the story had been told accurately, at least once. Later that night, Daniel asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you ever feel guilty?" he said. "For what?" "For not trying harder to fix it." I thought about it for a long moment. "I tried for years," I said finally. "I just didn't call it that." He nodded. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft and steady, the kind that changes how everything sounds. Ethan pressed his face to the window. "It's quiet," he said. "Yes," I told him. "It is." And for the first time in a long time, quiet didn't feel like something to be afraid of. Spring arrived slowly that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow melted into thin, stubborn patches along the sidewalks. Trees stayed bare longer than usual, branches dark and exposed against the sky. It felt appropriate, like the world was waiting to see what would grow back. Ethan noticed the change before I did. "The tree outside my classroom has buds," he told me one morning, pulling on his shoes. "They're tiny, but they're there." I looked out the window and saw what he meant, small green dots clinging to branches that had looked dead just weeks before. "That's how it starts," I said. He nodded, thoughtful, like he was filing that away for later. Life didn't magically get easier, it got clearer. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming, stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for conversations that no longer needed to happen. The space that opened up felt strange at first, like an empty room you're not sure how to use. Then it started to fill. Ethan's teacher emailed to say he'd been talking more in class, raising his hand, volunteering answers. "He seems more confident lately," she wrote. I read the sentence twice. At home, he started singing while he brushed his teeth. Loud, off-key, completely unconcerned with whether anyone approved. He asked questions without lowering his voice at the end, without turning them into apologies. One night, as I was tucking him in, he asked, "Do you think Grandma misses me?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "I think," I said carefully, "that some people miss the version of themselves they liked better." He frowned, thinking. "Not the kid?" "Not always," I said. He accepted that more easily than I expected. Children don't need perfect explanations. They need honest ones. Daniel remained a steady presence. Not hovering. Just there. He never spoke badly about my parents in front of Ethan, never filled the silence with commentary. One afternoon, as we sat on his back porch watching Ethan draw with sidewalk chalk, Daniel said, "You know, your mother always needed an audience." I glanced at him. "She still does." "She won't get one from me," he said. That was the moment I realized how rare it was to have someone in your life who didn't need to be convinced. Around that time, my parents stopped sending messages altogether. No more vague invitations. No more carefully worded guilt. The mediation payments arrived quietly each month, on schedule, stripped of commentary. They complied without reconnecting. It was transactional, and somehow that felt honest. Lauren tried once more. She showed up at my door unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. I opened it before I thought better of myself. She looked tired, angry, defensive. "We didn't grow up like this," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "No," I agreed, "we didn't." "You're acting like they're monsters." "I'm acting like they made choices," I said. "So did I." She paced the living room, hands moving sharply. "You always think you're right." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't before. Not cruelty, fear. Fear of what happens when the roles change. "I think I'm done pretending," I said. She stopped pacing. "So that's it?" "Yes." She left without another word. I locked the door behind her and didn't feel the urge to chase. That night, Ethan asked if we could plant something in the yard. "Like the tree at school," he said. We bought a small sapling from a local nursery the next weekend. Nothing impressive, just a young tree with thin branches and a fragile trunk. As we dug the hole together, Ethan said, "It's going to take a long time to grow." "I know," I said. "But it will," he added confidently. We packed the dirt down and watered it carefully. When we were done, he stood back and looked at it, hands on his hips. "See?" he said. "It just needs space." I laughed softly. That evening, after he went to bed, I sat on the couch and thought about how much effort I'd spent trying to make myself fit into a family that only valued me when I was convenient. I thought about the hospital, the hallway, the choice that had been made so casually. And I realized something important. I didn't miss my parents. I missed the idea that if something went wrong, they would choose us. Now I knew better, and knowing better didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt like standing on solid ground. By the time summer arrived, the story had settled into its final shape. Not the version my parents would have told, not the one that made anyone look better than they were, just the one that existed, quietly, without needing agreement. The mediation payments continued to arrive each month. Same amount, same date, no messages attached, no attempts to reopen conversation. It was compliance without connection, and I learned to accept it for what it was. Daniel once asked if that bothered me. "It would have," I said before. Now it just felt finished. Ethan finished first grade with a crooked smile and a certificate that said, "Most Curious Mind." He held it like it might disappear if he didn't grip it tightly enough. "They clapped for me," he said, eyes bright. "Everyone." I clapped again when we got home, louder. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't need to. That was when I realized how much energy he'd been using before, measuring himself against reactions that never came. Without that weight, he grew fast, not taller, freer. One afternoon, while we were cleaning out a drawer, I found an old envelope with my mother's handwriting on it. Inside was a birthday card she'd given Ethan years earlier. The message was brief, polite, signed neatly. I held it for a moment, then put it back, not in the drawer, in the recycling bin. There was no ceremony to it, no anger. Just a decision that some things didn't need to take up space anymore. Daniel watched from the doorway. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. Later that week, a distant cousin messaged me, someone I barely spoke to. She wrote carefully, like she was stepping onto thin ice. I heard what happened. I just wanted to say, "I believe you." I stared at the words longer than necessary. "Thank you," I typed back. It was enough. There was no apology tour, no family meeting to repair things. The people who mattered adjusted. The rest stayed where they were. Ethan and I took a short trip near the end of summer. Nothing extravagant. A small cabin by a lake. No cell service. No schedule. The first night, we sat on the dock with our feet in the water, watching the sky darken slowly. "Mom?" Ethan said. "Yeah?" "Do you think people know when they're hurting someone?" I considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," I said, "and sometimes they know and decide it's worth it." He thought about that, then nodded. "That's not nice." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He skipped a stone across the water and watched it disappear. "I'm glad you picked me." The sentence landed deep. "I will always pick you," I said. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed listening to the quiet lap of water against wood, I thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how close we'd come to teaching him that love was conditional, that safety was temporary. We hadn't escaped without damage, but we had escaped with our truth intact. Back home, the tree we planted in spring had grown a few inches. Small leaves spread out from its branches, stubborn and green. Ethan watered it carefully, like it was a responsibility he took seriously. "It's stronger now," he said. "Yes," I said, "it is." So were we. There were still moments when memory surprised me. A familiar song, a holiday advertisement, a passing thought of how things used to be. But the ache didn't linger. It passed, the way weather does. And when it did, what remained was something steadier than hope. It was certainty. A year passed without ceremony. No anniversary marked it. No date circled on a calendar. Time just kept moving, and one day I realized I hadn't thought about the hospital in weeks. Not the hallway, not the curtain, not the sound of Ethan's fingers slipping from my sleeve. That surprised me more than anything else. Ethan turned 7 in early fall. He insisted on helping plan his birthday this time. Not a theme exactly, just rules. "No games where people get eliminated," he said seriously. "No loud surprises. And I want Uncle Daniel there the whole time." "All reasonable," I said. The party was small. A few friends from school, cupcakes that leaned slightly to one side, a backyard that smelled like leaves and grass. When everyone sang, Ethan smiled wide and didn't look around to see who might be missing. That was the moment I knew we were really past it. Later that evening, after the kids had been picked up and the yard went quiet, Daniel and I sat on the steps watching the last of the daylight fade. "You did good," he said. "We did," I corrected. He nodded. The mediation payments ended quietly a few months later. Final deposit. No note, no acknowledgement. Just an automated confirmation email. I archived it without rereading the number. It had served its purpose. My parents didn't reach out when the payment stopped. They didn't reach out when Ethan had a birthday, or when the holidays came and went without us. The silence became permanent, and then, strangely, irrelevant. One evening, Ethan was doing homework at the table while I cooked dinner. He hummed under his breath, tapping his pencil lightly, completely unbothered by the sound. "Mom," he said suddenly. "Yes?" "If someone says, 'I'm too much' again, I'm going to tell them they can have less of me." I paused, wooden spoon mid-air. "That sounds fair." He smiled, pleased with himself, and went back to his work. Later that night, after he was asleep, I stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, listening to the quiet. I thought about how close I'd come to teaching him the wrong lesson, that love meant tolerating harm, that family meant enduring neglect, that safety was something you earned by being smaller. Instead, he learned something else, that walking away can be an act of care, that boundaries are not punishments, that the people who stay matter more than the people who demand. I used to wonder if I'd gone too far, if exposing the truth had been cruel, if protecting my child had cost him something he might need later. Now I understood. What I'd given him wasn't loss, it was clarity. Outside, the tree we planted rustled softly in the night breeze. Its branches were stronger now, roots deeper. It didn't look impressive yet, but it was growing in the right direction. I turned off the hallway light and went to bed knowing something I hadn't known before. If protecting your child costs you your family, then it wasn't protection you lost. It was permission to stop pretending. And that was something I would never regret. Some people will say, "I went too far." That family should be forgiven, no matter what. But if protecting your child costs you your place at the table, maybe that table was never safe. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories like this.